You meet a lot of people who know the basics of sewing, but cannot follow the directions that come with a pattern, because it is kind of like learning a different language. So I'm going to teach you how to sew Simplicity 1299 View A. This video, we're starting with the skirt. The skirt is a lot simpler than the jacket, so we can build confidence. I won't be going over in detail how to cut out the pattern, how to cut out your fabric. I'll go over it briefly, but not in major detail, or how to use your sewing machine. This video is just a visual of all the instructions so that you could see how they're done. And so let's get started. We are going to start with the skirt. For that, we are going to need pattern pieces 15 through 19. Here's piece 15. We cut one piece on the fold. I already have my fabric folded. This line right here that the arrow is indicating gets placed directly on the fold like this, as close to that edge as possible. So we'll pin it to the fabric and then cut it just like that. We have piece 16 that comes with this little note. This one also gets cut on the fold, and we cut one in our self fabric, which is what I'm using here, and it also says to cut one in interfacing. Here's a piece of interfacing. These home sewing patterns usually use iron-on adhesive interfacing. It's smooth on one side, and it has this bumpy texture. I don't know if you could see it. On the other side, that's the glue. You basically iron it on just like you would an iron-on patch. I'll show you that when we get to it. And then we have piece 17. That's the side and back of the skirt. This arrow is showing the grain line, so you don't just want to cut this at any angle, because then it won't lay right with the rest on the body when it's done. So you want this to match your grain line. On my fabric, it's this direction. Then we have pattern piece 18, which I'm pretty much going to set aside till later. This is the elastic guide to show us how much elastic to cut for the waistband. We're just going to set that aside for now. And the last piece is pattern piece 19. It also gets cut on the fold, and we're cutting 3 of them, but this is that lace ruffle. So I'll be cutting that in a different fabric that I will show you later. So we'll cut all the pieces for the skirt in our self fabric first, and I will show you the lace fabric once these are all cut out. Now that we have our self fabrics cut out, we have a couple of markings. So on piece 16, there's a little dot right there that we need to mark. I like to use these water erasable pens. I find them better than Taylor's chalk. They're brighter, so they pop out more, and then you can just use water to wash them away. So let's fill in dot 6. And remember, this is on the fold. So you're going to need to do the opposite side as well. So unfold it, line it up with your little notches, and add your marking. So we have our 2 little dots there. On piece 15, there's just one in the corner. And this is also on the fold, so we're going to need to flip it. All right. Line up with our notch as evenly as we can. Okay. Give that a mark. And then on piece 17, we have one little dot right here in the corner. Let's move that pin. And then we have a big dot right here. To differentiate the big dots and the small dots, I don't fill in the big dots so that I can tell without having to look at the pattern again. And there are 2 of these. So make sure you do the opposite side as well. Really quick, take out all the pins. All right, here is the first piece. Second. Line everything up, match your notches. Mark your little dot. And then we're going to mark the big dot. And now all the self pieces are ready to sew, but before I get to sewing, I am going to go onto I'm going to cut out the fabric for the contrast ruffle. Now we're going to cut the ruffle on the skirt. I'm using this ombre lace right here. We'll be using pattern piece 19, and we cut 3 of them on the fold. I already have my fabric folded. And when we place this, what I want to do is have the cream in the center and the darker pinks on the edges, and I want that matched in all 3 pattern pieces so that it looks like one piece once they're all sewn together. So I'll line this up and I will cut one of these out, and then I'll show you how I line it up with the next stripe in a moment. So I cut out 1 piece of 19, and now we got to cut out 2 more. So to match up these colors, you can either eyeball it, trying to place piece where you had it originally on the other stripe, but how I'm going to do it, which I find easier, is I pinned my fold so it can't wiggle around, and then I'm just going to line up my colors with the folded fabric here as best I can, and basically use this as my pattern piece, making sure it doesn't wiggle around. That way everything matches as perfectly as possible. And then I will do that one more time up here on one more stripe, and then we can get to sewing. Now we're on to the fun part, the sewing. Now skirt A has 15 steps. Step 1 says stay stitch 1/2 inch seam or 1.3 centimeters upper edge of skirt front 15. So we have our skirt front, and what those instructions mean is we're just going to sew across the top edge 1/2 inch. So a 1/2 inch seam across the top edge. A stay stitch is for exactly what it says, so that this top edge stays where it needs to be, so it doesn't stretch or wiggle or warp in any way, so that it can fit appropriately. So let's take this to the sewing machine. So at the sewing machine, remember we are sewing 1/2 inch from the top edge of the front skirt. So back stitch and then sew all the way across. So there you can see we have our stitching 1/2 inch from the top edge. Step 2 can actually be split up into 3 smaller steps. This is really wordy if you've never sewn anything or followed one of these patterns before. So the first part is apply interfacing to skirt front facing 16. That's pattern piece 16, which was this guy right here that we cut. And we cut one in our self fabric. Let me zoom out a little bit. And one in our interfacing fabric. So what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna flip this piece onto the wrong side, the back, and we're gonna take our interfacing. This is the bumpy side with the glue, and we're gonna match that with the wrong side of the fabric. And then we're gonna use an iron to press this down and melt the glue to this piece. So I'm gonna go do that, and I will be right back. So now our fusible is on the back of piece 16, so you can see. The next part of step 2 says machine stitch unnotched edge of facing 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from raw edge. Press under raw edge along stitching. What that means is we're going to stitch 1/4 inch along this part of the piece. The top part is where the notches are, and they are saying unnotched edge of facing. So right here, we're just gonna stitch 1/4 inch. And then when we're done with that, we are gonna fold at that stitch line and press up, just like that. So let's start with stitching. All right, here we go. Stitching, do a little back stitch, and go all the way across. When you get to the end, do a little back stitch. Okay. Now I'm going to take this to my iron and just fold up like this. And I will see you back here when I'm done with that. All right, I'm back from the iron. I folded this piece once again along this stitch line. So you can see it's up a little bit. This didn't want to stay completely flat, but it's probably just the fabric I chose. It'll still work. Now, the last part of step 2 is with right sides together, pin facing to upper edge of skirt front, matching centers and small dots. Stitch, trim seam. So what does that mean? We are taking our front piece. Let me move this out of the way. This is piece 15 and our piece 16. And we're gonna match our little dots that we marked and our little notches, which are these little triangles, and match them as best we can. And then we are going to pin and stitch. We're gonna stitch at 5/8. These home sewing patterns, unless they give you a measurement and tell you, hey, sew this at a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch seam, it's always gonna be 5/8 seam allowance. So let's pin this together, just like that. Matching as best we can. My marks seem a touch off, but let's just get them as close as possible. There we go. All right, so we're gonna take this to the sewing machine really quick and just stitch our 5/8 inch seam allowance. Here we are at the sewing machine, sewing that 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're gonna do a little stitch, little back stitch, and just go all the way across. Make sure you don't stitch over your pins. I happen to make that mistake a lot. But if you hit the pin wrong, you can break your needle. And that's always really annoying. Alright, getting to the end. I always do a little back stitch to hold your stitching in place. There we go. And now we are done with step 2. So I will see you at step 3. Forgot to mention before we go in step 3, we're going to trim this seam just a little bit. That way there is less bulk on our skirt. Make sure you do not cut across your stitches. And if this is too bulky later, we can always cut more, but I don't want to cut too much. All right, now step 3. Now step 3 is really easy. Turn facing to inside and press. Here is what that means. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see. All right, so we have our pattern piece. Our facing is a sewn, which is what we just did. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this to our iron. Gonna flip it like this. And you are just going to fold this so that the facing is on the inside as best we can. And we're going to take it to our iron and just press this to the inside along the top. Just like this, and then iron it so it stays. So that way we have a nice clean edge on our front skirt. So I'll iron it and I will show you what that looks like in a minute. Here we go, I'm back from the iron. Here's from the back side of me folding that facing piece and ironing it down so that on the front we have a nice clean edge. Now we're done with step 3. Okay, we are on step 4. Stitch center back seams of skirt back and side front 17 sections. This step is very easy. You pull the camera back. It's a really big pattern piece. Okay. So we have our 2 pattern piece 17s. And all we're doing is putting the right sides together with the notches matching. I didn't do the cleanest job of cutting my notches, but you're just lining up. So you can see, here we go. The 3 notches, I just cut a big rectangle where they were. You're gonna match those up with the right sides together, and we're just gonna stitch with our regular 5/8 seam allowance. Just gonna quickly pin it in place so it doesn't wiggle. And then we'll take this to the sewing machine. And that is all for step 4. Okay, we're at our sewing machine. If the instructions don't give a measurement for the seam allowance will always be 5/8 inch. I'm gonna line that up and start sewing. Give a little back stitch and go all the way across. Once we get to the end, give a little back stitch, and that's it. I am gonna take this to the iron and just press my seams open. And then we can go on to the next step. Step 5, we are making the elastic casing. Press 1.5 inch or 3.8 centimeters on upper edge skirt back to inside, forming casing. Press under 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters on raw edge. Stitch close to upper and lower edges of casing. That is really wordy, but it's not as complicated as it sounds. So we're gonna take our piece 17s that we just sewed together. And you wanna make sure you're doing this on the correct edge. It's really easy to mix the top and the bottom. So you can always take your pattern piece and line it up to make sure you're on the waist. So here's our little triangle notches matching up, and this top is the waistline. You want to double check, it's really easy to confuse that one. So basically what this is saying, and I'm going to flip this to the wrong side of the fabric, is to make the casing, we're going to fold 1.5 inches, and then to have a clean edge right here, we're going to fold this in 1/4 inch. And then we're going to take it to the iron and press it so that it stays nice and flat for the first part of step 5. Now, this is how I would do it to make sure I'm folding at the correct place. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I have the right side of the fabric, and I'm going to take my water erasable pen. Feel free to use Taylor's chalk or whatever marking material that you use on a regular basis that you like. And I'm going to take my tape measure. I'm going to put it at the top of the waist, and I'm going to mark 1.5 inches. And I am going to do that across the entire waist. Just at a couple of intervals. All right, do that to the other side. All right, next, I'm also going to mark 1/4 inch below the waist. So line that up. That's a half. Mark the 1/4 inch. And mark that all the way across as well. Okay. Now, when I take this to the iron, I will have it on the wrong side. But now I know when I go to the iron where I want to fold this. So I'm going to fold in 1/4 inch at that 1/4 inch marking, and I'm going to press that all the way across. Can you see? Yeah. And then once that's pressed, I'm going to find my little 1.5 inch markings and press that all the way across. So it will look like this once it's ironed. So I'm going to go to the iron, and I will show you what that looks like without me holding it down in a few seconds. Okay, just came back from the iron. As you can see, I have it pressed. I had it pressed at the 1/4 inch markings and at the 1.5 inch markings. The next part of step 5 says to stitch close to the upper and lower edges of casing. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch as close to the upper edge as possible and do that as with the bottom edge as well. Before I take that, if your fabric is a little floppy in some areas and not really cooperating, feel free to pin it down. That way you have a little less stress at the sewing machine. I'm just going to do that at a couple of places where it's kind of annoying me. All right, and I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I will see you there. All right, I'm going to start with this top edge. I'm going to line up my needle to get as close to the edge as possible. Let's see, that looks good. Stitch forward, give a little back stitch, and we're going to go all the way across. All right, now we're going to do the same thing, just at the lower edge. So let's line up my needle. There we go. And go all the way across, just like we did with the upper edge. All right. So now you can see, let me move the camera so you can take a look at the casing. We have it stitched to down. Here it is from the right side of the fabric. We have our little tunnel that our elastic will go in, which is what we're going to do in step 6. Now, step 6 says, cut a piece of elastic the length of skirt back elastic guide 18, insert elastic through casing having ends even, stitch across ends of casing catching elastic. Now, let me show you what they mean by that. We are going to take our pattern piece 18 that we had set aside earlier, and we are basically using this piece as a ruler. So we're going to take our elastic, and they're asking for 1 inch wide braided elastic. We're going to match it up at the end. And using this as a ruler, I have nowhere to cut. So we have a piece of elastic that's the same length as pattern piece 18. And that's all we need this for, so we can set it aside. Now we need to put our elastic in the casing that we just sewed. Now this can be a little finicky, so don't lose patience. This is how I do it. I'm going Can you see where my hands are? Take a safety pin and put a safety pin on each end of my elastic. Oops. Come on, there we go. And I'm gonna just zoom in a little bit. My scissors. All right. Oh, don't need to zoom in that much. Okay. So I'm gonna start at one end and get this elastic all the way to the other end. Now be patient. It takes a minute to do this. So stick it in. It helps in the beginning to fold it like a little taco a little bit and shove it in. At some point, this method won't work. A little sooner than, there we go. All right, and when that stops working, oops, something is wonky. All right. All right, I feel my safety pin. I kind of see the little butt end of it, and I can hold it and then scrunch the fabric toward it, and then when I have enough fabric, hold, and this is all by feel, hold the closure of the safety pin and pull it in. Let me show you that again. Grab the end that you can feel. Here's the front. Squish fabric across it, and then hold that end and push it across. Once again, be patient. This just takes time. At some point, you're gonna get the fabric bunching. That is what you want. This elastic that we're putting in is shorter than the length of our pattern pieces, so it's gonna bunch, and that's perfectly fine. Let the fabric do that. I see your safety pin emerging. All right. All right. Oops, it looks like it curved. There we go. All right, we have our elastic at each end. We want it lined up like this. I'm not removing these yet because I don't want to lose my elastic, so I'm going to do a little more fiddling. Basically, we want the end of the elastic lined up with the end of the casing on both ends. We also want to distribute all this shearing, all this bunching of the fabric so that it's even. Otherwise, it'll look really weird when you're wearing the skirt. So I'm just going to fiddle with all the bunching, pushing it around until I get it all even into where I visually like it. See how there's a lot of bunching here and less here? And less here, just less at the ends. Oop. That's why we have our 1-inch elastic with our safety pins. We don't lose it. It also looks like it's curved in there, so I might stick something in there to flatten it out. All right. That looks pretty even to me. So the last step is to take it to the sewing machine. We're gonna remove our safety pins and we're going to line up the elastic with the casing, and we're just gonna stitch the casing, and we're gonna stitch the casing down, catching the elastic. We wanna make sure we have our stitching go in the casing and the elastic. That way, the elastic, when you're wearing the skirt and when we remove the safety pins, don't go back inside the tunnel. So I'm gonna set up my sewing machine and I'll show you how to do that. All right, we're at the sewing machine. I'm gonna remove our safety pin, line up my elastic with the end of our casing, and just stitch across that opening of the casing tunnel. All right, do that with the other end. Oop, got some fabric fraying. And there we go. We have our elastic casing done. Now, if your shearing and bunching unevened itself, you can still fiddle with it. It's not sewn down. You can keep playing with it. Boing, 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 boing. All right, I'll see you on the next sewing step. Step 7 is really wordy. We're going to separate this into smaller portions. The first part of step 7, open out front facing on skirt front with right sides together, pin skirt front to skirt back at side seams matching small dots, stitch side seams. Let's just do that part first. Let me show you what they mean by that. We're going to take our front skirt, there we go, a little better, and our back skirt. We're going to put the right sides together. For me, that's the outside of the fabric, the shiny part that the world is going to see. Place the back just on the table like that. And then we're going to take the front bit and take our shiny bit and put the right sides together. So the side the world sees when you're wearing it are together. You're going to take your facing and push it up. Make sure it's out of the way. And then we're going to pin these together, matching the small dots and the notches. So I have the little markings that we made at the beginning when we were marking our patterns. I got those right there, but basically we're just matching these edges. Just like that. Let me get my hands out of the way. My dots are touching, but really we're just matching the edges just like that. Nice close up. There we go. And pinning it. Making sure it's where I want it. All right. Pin the rest of the seam together. And then we're going to take it to our sewing machine and stitch at our 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're at the sewing machine. Once again, 5/8 inch seam allowance, and stitch the side seams of the skirt together. Give a little back stitch and then just go all the way to the hem. Try not to stitch over your pins. I have a habit of doing that. Alrighty, and now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Alright, we sewed the one side seam, as I said. Now we're doing the same thing to the other side. So we have our back skirt, we have our front skirt. Get your pins ready. Have our facing up and out of the way, and matching the dots. I don't know if you can see my markings. We're going to just do the same thing. All right, we have our next side seam pinned together, taking it to the sewing machine and just repeating what we did at the sewing machine previously at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once again, just sewing the side seams at 5/8 inch seam allowance. And here we are. We have our side seam sewn, everything's attached, and this is the exciting part because it's starting to actually look like a skirt. At least I find that exciting when it starts to look like something you're trying to make. All right, let's move on to the next part of step 7. And that just says press seams toward front. So the seams that we just sewed, we're going to take to our iron and we're going to press them so that they face the front skirt on both sides. So I'm going to take that to the iron and press that, and I'll show you what it looks like when I come back. So I just came back from the iron and pressed my seams toward the front. I know it doesn't look that much different, but it will make everything lay nicer when you're done sewing the skirt. So it is important to have your seams face the correct direction. Now the next part of step 7, here we go. If you can see it, says turn front facing to inside turning under side edges and slip stitching over seams, and then press. So they're talking about this front facing. They want us to fold it back over, so you'll see that there's a natural bend to where we didn't sew it where there is seam allowance. I'm really bad at phrasing that, but let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about, because that's what we're here for, the visualizing. All right, we're going to take our facing. It will naturally fold, just like you see here. Get my hands out of the way. And fold our facing back toward the inside. And then they're going to want us to slip stitch these little edges into place. And I'll show you how to do a slip stitch. And then it says to press. I'm actually going to press this first so it stays really well. It just will be easier. I might press it again after I'm finished, but first I'm going to take this to the iron and steam it a little bit so that it stays just like this, and then I will come back and I will show you how to do the slip stitch. All right, I'm back from the iron, and now we're going to do the slip stitch, and we're going to do it to each side so that our facing stays in place just like that and looks really nice. So let me zoom in to show you how to do that stitch. There we go. Turn this to the side. All right. You're going to take a needle and thread. I already have this needle threaded. And if this keeps annoying you and bending and you want it folded in place without moving, like I'm going to do, you can take a pin and just keep it in place. There we go. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. I think that'll be a little bit easier. So I'm going to take my needle, and I don't want the knot to show, the knot at the end of the thread, even though it's small. So I'm going to go in, take my needle, and start from the inside, a little curve, and have it come out right at the fold. All right. I'm actually gonna flip this. Sorry about that. It'll be easier for me to see what I'm doing. All right. So the first thing we're gonna do is take our needle, and we're going to take the small, put it into the fabric that is not the facing. We want to make sure it doesn't go all the way into the back. So you want to make sure you only get the first layer of fabric so that we don't see the stitching on the front. The whole point of this is to hide it, hide the stitching, and don't tangle your your thread in your pin. All right. Then we're going to stitch. We're going to put our needle into the fabric of the fold. So we're sticking with the fold of the fabric. I know I'm not the best at explaining, but hopefully this visual helps. And I'll do it multiple times throughout this. And put the needle thread through, and then you see how it's kind of hiding our stitches. So once again, taking our needle and just catching the first layer of fabric so it does not get shown on the front pulling it through, going back into the fold of the facing, pulling it, and it is pulling these two seams together so everything looks nice and clean. Once again, just catching the first layer, oops, of fabric, pulling it through, and on to our facing, stitching the, just catching the fold. All right, I'm taking that pin out, it's annoying me. I don't need it anymore. There we go. And we're just doing this till we get all the way to the end, which I'm almost there. I want that to sit flatter, so I'm gonna stitch one more time. Oh, too many layers, come on. There we go. Stitch in there one more time so that it stays flat. There we go. All right, we've reached the end. We're gonna knot it. I'm gonna try to hide my little knot by putting it into the facing underneath. All right. You can knot this any way you want. This is just how I'm doing it. I leave a little loop and then I put my needle through the loop and pull. Now I'm going to double knot it so you can see that one more time. Going in the facing, on the inside of the facing, pulling through, having a little bit of a loop, taking my needle, putting it into the loop, and then pulling tight. And now we're going to snip this and do the next side. So just in case my jumbled up words aren't making sense, you'll get to see this one more time. Just knotting the end of my thread. All right. I'm going to take my pin just so that this stays in place. All right, probably be easier, which direction? Easier to start in this direction. All right. Make sure you can see. All right. Taking my needle, hiding my knot through the fold. All right. Now, it'll be easier to do it this way. Okay. Everyone can see? Cool. All right. We're going to catch just the first layer of the fabric and then the fold of the facing. And repeat. the first layer of the fabric. Oops. Don't tangle. Always tangle your thread when everyone's watching. And then the fold of the fabric. First layer of the waistband. Fold of the facing. Repeat. Okay, I don't need that pin anymore. Gonna catch it one more time. Oops. There we go. All right. Oh, can you see? All right. Now we're gonna knot it. And do the rest of step 7. All right, so now we are on the last part of step 7. Here we go. Sorry, it's a little bit of a shadow. It's getting a little dark. All right. Based lower edge of facing in place. Now basically what that means is we are going to use a larger stitch and stitch this bottom edge of the facing into place. And I'll show you how to do that on the sewing machine. Just give me a moment. Now when I first turn on my sewing machine, it has the stitch length right here. And now here I have just turned the machine on and I have not changed anything. These are the stitch lengths that my sewing machine automatically uses. But a basting stitch is a larger stitch. It's got the stitch lengths are longer. So I'm gonna change these to make them longer. On my machine, I just hit these arrow buttons. So now they have a longer length. And the reason for that is the basting stitch is not staying into your skirt the whole time. It is keeping something in place and we are gonna remove it later. So as you can see, I've also threaded my machine with pink thread that does not match my fabric. And I do this because I am removing it later, as I said, and I want to be able to see it really easily. So I have a wider stitch. I'll take you to, there we go. Take you to where the needle is. Over, we have our facing, and we are stitching the bottom edge of this in our larger basting stitch. So this guy's a little thick. All right. We're not going to back stitch either. We want this really easy to remove. All right. Sorry, I hit the camera. And here we go. Remember, we're not back stitching at the end. And there we go. We have our basting stitch ready to go and also ready to remove. We're now on step 8. We are basically halfway through. On outside, stitch facing in place along a basting and close to upper edge, connecting to casing stitching. Now, what they mean by that is we are turning our skirt right side out. So this is the side that will be showing to the world when you wear it. And along this top upper edge, we're going to take it to our sewing machine and stitch as close to the top as possible. And then we're going to stitch on top of our basting seam, our basting stitch. We're using this basting stitch as a guide. And then what they mean by connecting casing to stitching, that's because we have that stitching at the top edge and about 1.25 inches down, forming our casing. So now it'll all look like it's connected in one stitch line. So I will take it to the sewing machine and show you how we're going to do that. All right, we're at the sewing machine again. So I'm going to stitch along the upper edge of that front skirt as close to the edge as possible. Here we go. Give a little back stitch and go all the way across. All right, so we have it stitched at the top edge. Now we're going to stitch basically right on top of our basting stitch. That basting stitch is our guide. There we go. And now it doesn't say so in the directions, but this is the point where I'm actually going to remove that basting stitch now. I don't need it anymore, so I'm going to go ahead, take my seam ripper, and just start taking it out. Might actually do it on the opposite side, just in case I catch the fabric. The shiny Lurex thread going through this fabric can be caught easily. All right, I removed some of it so you could see what it's going to look like. Oops, still caught. I'll go in and make sure it's all out. But you'll see how it's connecting the front and the back stitching together, so it all looks like one line. I'm a little off, but that's okay. And I will see you for the next step once I remove all my basting. Now step 9 says machine based lower edge of skirt 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters from raw edge. Finish lower edge with a zigzag stitch or overlock serge. What that means is we're going to take our skirt. There we go. And we're just going to do a base stitch, which is what we did up top. It has the little bit of a longer stitch, and we're going to do it 5/8 inch from the top edge. And then we're going to do a zigzag stitch on the lower edge, and that'll keep this from fraying, which my fabric is obviously doing a lot of. So I'll take it to the machine and I'll show you what I mean by that. All right, I'm at the machine, and first I'm going to stitch 5/8 inch along the edge. I'm going to, you see I'm going to change my stitch line to be a little bit longer. And then I'm going to go and stitch that base stitch. It's just 5/8 inch. And we're going to do it all the way around the hem. All right, now we're going to do the zigzag stitch. Most sewing machines have a zigzag. Let's see, can you see mine? There we go. So I have a couple options that are automatically just placed right here. I can also go in here and choose more, but I'm just going to choose a basic zigzag stitch. It'll be in a different place on your sewing machine, especially if you don't have this exact machine, but all sewing machines should have a basic zigzag stitch. So we're going to go back to where you can see the stitching. Sorry, my adjustments. And I'm also going to get my scissor ready. But just because I have a lot of fraying bits on my fabric, and I want to snip some of those off so they don't get caught too much up in my zigzag stitching. I'm going to do that really quick. Some of those little fraying bits. Got a lot of them right here. All right. All right, you might want to practice this on a scrap piece of fabric just to make sure that you are hitting the right spot, because you want to, the zigzag is going to go boop, 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 boop. It's going to go back and forth. So you want to make sure it doesn't eat your fabric. I don't, that's a really bad explanation. But you just want to practice with it to make sure it's hitting the edge and not going off, because then it can snag the fabric. I already know where mine sits, so I should be okay. And we're just gonna zigzag all the way across the bottom edge. Oh man, I ran out of thread in my bobbin. That happens. So here's the zigzag stitch. I haven't gone all the way across because I ran out of thread. I think that happens to every sewer. But here you can see the little zigzag stitch lines. So I'm going to rethread my bobbin and finish this up, and I will meet you at step 10. Now we're on step 10, and it says, with right sides together, stitch notched ends of 3 skirt ruffles, 19 or 20 sections. The 19 and 20 is just indicating whether you're doing skirt A or skirt B. The only difference is, I think, the width or the length of the ruffle. We're doing skirt A, and we already cut that out. They also give us a tip here that is basically saying if your fabric is fraying on the ends, you can use a zigzag stitch. So just select your zigzag stitch on your sewing machine and stitch along the edges of all your pieces. I'm gonna skip that step. My fabric isn't fraying or falling apart. This fabric doesn't need a hem. So basically what step 10 is telling us is we are stitching all 3 of these pieces together. Let me zoom out so you can see all 3 of my pieces. All 3 of my skirt ruffles, 1, 2, and 3. We're gonna stitch them together. We're gonna pin them together and then take them to the sewing machine and stitch. And how we know where to pin them is we have our notches on the pattern, and we're gonna match the notches, which are the little triangles on your pattern piece. And make sure the right sides are together. That way the stitching is always on the inside. So here's our notch. Here's one of the ruffle pieces. I'm gonna take a second of the ruffles. Okay. We're gonna have the right sides together. Get our pins. We're gonna match our notches. Oops. And just pin the edges together. All right. Now we have our next edge, and we have our next ruffle piece. We're going to put the right sides together, matching the notches, and keep pinning. All right, all 3 are together, except for our ends, because we want to make this a giant circle. So we got ruffle 1, ruffle 2, ruffle 3. I'm gonna sew the ends together, and when we're done, this will just be a giant circle of lace fabric. There we go. All right. Match the notches once again and just pin. All right. Now everything's pinned together. Let's take this to the sewing machine. All right, we are at the sewing machine. We're gonna stitch all the seams we just pinned together, and it's gonna be at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Turn my sewing machine on. All right. Give a back stitch, and just go all the way across. Remember to back stitch. All right, 2 more seams to go. One more. There we go. Now we're on step 11. On outside, pin straight edge of 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter wide lace for view A, or 7/8 or 2.2 centimeters wide lace for view B. We're doing view A, so we'll be doing a 3/8 inch trim or a 1 centimeter, depending, metric or the silly system we use in the US. Over upper edge of ruffle, turning under and lapping one end at one seam. Stitch close to straight edge of lace. So basically we are sewing our trim to the upper edge of the ruffle. All right, so we have the upper edge and the lower edge. If you're not sure which one's the lower edge or the upper edge, use your pattern piece for reference. The let's see, on this side you can see the notch. The notch is closer to the upper edge than it is to the lower edge. So look on the inside of your pattern piece at one of your seams and look where you put your notch. I put the notches right here, and it is closer to the upper edge, so I know this is my upper edge. So we're gonna take our trim. I'm actually not using a lace trim. I'm using, let me find the end, this ruffle trim. We're gonna attach it the same way though. You can deviate a little bit from what they're telling you to use. I think this is gonna look cuter. So I'm using this little ruffle trim. All right, let me zoom in a little bit so you can watch me pin. I'm gonna start at a seam because I wanna end at a seam. Because once we get to the end, they tell us to fold over and then we can hide it. So they want us to pin, and this lace is a little crooked from whoever cut it the last time, so I'm just gonna make this a straight line, make it easier for me. Okay. We're going to start, and we're just gonna pin it to the edge. I'm matching it just like that. All right, so we're just gonna pin to the edge of the top of our ruffle. And we're just gonna do this all the way around. So you get to watch me do something very, very exciting. Pin lots and lots of trim to the top edge of our ruffle. Okay, now that we're at the end, this is what they want us to do. I'm going to just, let's see, cut a little extra so there's a bit of an overlap. All right. Let me just put one more pin in here. And then I'll show you how to end it. You stay in place. All right. So we're gonna take our end piece. We are gonna fold it to the back. Fold it a little bit more. We want it to, let's see, there we go. Fold it back and just pin in place. Just like that. Except mine's a little uneven. There we go. That way you don't see the end piece. It's especially important if your trim wants to unravel. There we go. Now we take it to the sewing machine and stitch this trim to the ruffle. Now we're at the sewing machine, so I'm going to start sewing the trim into place. Before you start sewing, you need to pick a spot where to sew, where you'll make sure you catch the back of the fabric. So fiddle around with it, put your needle down a couple times and make sure it's not close to either the bottom edge of the trim or the top edge of the trim, just so you make sure everything is caught and that you're not sewing for no reason. All right, so I think, let's see, there works for me. Start a little bit. All right, I'm trying to start at our finishing, where our trim overlaps. All right, I'm gonna use the pressure foot to keep everything in place and take my pin out. And I'm gonna start sewing. Do a back stitch. And go all the way around. At the end, back stitch, and there we go. Our trim is attached to the top edge. I'll trim this thread later. And now for step 12, it says on outside, pin straight edge of 1.5 inch or 3/8 centimeters wide lace for view A, which is what we're doing, over lower edge of ruffle, turning under and lapping one end at one seam, stitch close to straight edge of lace. So this is the exact same as step 11, except instead of putting the trim along the top edge of the ruffle, we're just putting the trim along the bottom of the ruffle. So this might be a little tricky to see because I couldn't find a trim I liked at the store, and I'm actually going to wear this, so I didn't just want to choose anything. I decided to make my trim out of the same fabric that the ruffle is in. So it'd be a little tricky to see since they match pretty well. But we're going to start at the exact same seam that we started on the top ruffle, where you can see the overlap, just where we overlapped it. So same seam that we started on the top ruffle, we're going to start on the bottom. Get my pins closer. Starting at the seam, just placing the trim on the outside of the fabric and pinning it along the edge. We're going to do that all the way across. It's probably take a little while. It's a pretty large piece of fabric. Okay, let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing at the end once again. All right, we're gonna overlap our trims a little bit. All right, cut off the excess. We want it to overlap a little bit because, once again, can you see what I'm doing? All right. We're ending by taking the end piece of the trim, folding it over, and then pinning it in place. So once again, same thing we did in step 11, taking the end, folding it over, and pinning it in place. Oops, make sure it doesn't wiggle. Oops. All right, let me put one pin right here so it doesn't move. All right. Put that there. Fold over and pin in place. There. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew it just like we did in step 11. All right, we're at the sewing machine. I'm lining up my trim because we want to sew at the edge, but we don't want to miss the trim. It's probably a little hard to see because the trim matches so well. My pins are going the wrong way. I do that accidentally all the time, but I don't feel like repinning, so we're just gonna suffer through it. All right. No, I don't think that's lining up correct. There we go. You want to make sure you're at the edge, but you don't miss the trim and then stitch just the ruffle. All right, I'm gonna back stitch. Remove that pin. Move my. All right. Be a little tricky with my pins going the wrong way, but we're gonna figure it out. Let's go. All right, ran out of thread in the bobbin. I'm gonna rethread this really quickly and get back to it. All right, I rethreaded my bobbin. Gonna realign everything and just start where I left off. Back stitch, and let's keep going. All right. Now we got our trim sewn on to the bottom. And now we're done with step 12. We're getting to the end. Step 13 says to gather, ruffle, stitch 1/8 inch or 3 millimeters from each side of gathering line, using a long machine stitch, breaking stitching at seams. Now, if you look at our pattern piece for piece 19, whoop, it has this dotted line. And this is your gathering line. It even says so. On the pattern, it says gathering line. And what we're doing is this ruffled piece we have is huge, way too big for our skirt. As you can see, whoosh, this would never fit. onto our skirt. It's probably twice the length it needs to be. So we're going to gather it up or shear it up, and we're going to use a gathering stitch for that. So going back to the pattern, that 1 inch gathering line, it's about 1 inch. You don't need to draw this on your pattern. See, about an inch. Probably exactly an inch. You don't need to draw this on your pattern. You can just use the marker at 1 inch on your sewing machine. And we're gonna do 2 gathering stitches. And I will take you to the sewing machine in a second and show you how to do that. All right, I'm at the sewing machine. This is the stitch length that my machine is automatically set to. But a gathering stitch, you want it to be a really long stitch so that it's easy to gather once we get to that bit, which I'll show you. So I'm gonna make these stitches basically as long as my machine will allow. Let's try this. Just keep pushing those buttons. Make it a really long stitch. All right, now, can you see that? There we go. I'm gonna take my skirt ruffle, but first I'm gonna take the tails of my bobbin. One goes to the bobbin, one goes to the needle. I want them really long, so I'm gonna pull those out and actually have really long tails right there. That will be very important for the gathering bit in a moment, which I believe is actually step 14. We're attaching this. All right. Now the gathering line was about at 1 inch, and I'm also using, as you can tell, a thread that doesn't match the color of this skirt because I want to remove this later, and it's just easy for me to see it if it doesn't match. All right, doesn't matter where you start. Alrighty, I'm gonna go at about an inch. I'm going a little over because this ruffle is longer than the actual skirt. So pick a spot. It doesn't have to be exact. You don't want it too off, but as long as it's somewhere near the top, you're all right. All right, press your foot down. We are not back stitching here because that will mess up when you gather. So no back stitching. And let's go all the way around the skirt. All right, now when you get to the end, don't get too excited. Do not stitch on top of this stitch line that you already did. Do not cut the threads yet. You want another really long tail. All right. So now you have 2 long tails. Now we're gonna do that again, stitching really close to our stitch line, but not on top of it. The reason why we're doing this again is once we start shearing and gathering this ruffle, if our thread snaps, we're basically screwed and have to take it all apart and start all over. If you have 2 of these stitches and one of your threads snaps, you get a second chance. So we're gonna do it again, and they tell you to do it twice because everyone knows you're probably gonna snap a thread. It's very common. It's easy to accidentally do. All right, once again, pull your bobbin and needle thread, your top and your bottom thread, so you have a long tail. Push it out of the way. Push your current tails out of the way. that are on your thread. You don't want to stitch over those. That'll be really annoying. And it doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line because, as I said, these aren't going to be shown. We're going to be taking these out. But you don't want to stitch on top of your stitch line. So make sure you're not doing that because that will make shearing and gathering this really difficult. And let's go again. I believe the instructions say 1/8 inch away from each other. You don't need to measure that exactly. Doesn't have to be exact, but you don't want it too far away either. So just keep that in mind. Just get as close as possible without being scared that you're gonna stitch on top of your original thread. Alright. Actually lining the end of the presser foot with the original thread will help you make sure you don't stitch on top of it. It's already trying to gather itself, so it's a little lumpy. Uh-oh, that's not a good sign. There we go. Oh no, I might not have enough in my bobbin. I shouldn't have risked it. No, I'm close to the end. Okay, I might get lucky. I didn't get lucky. All right, I did not get lucky. I'm a little short. But we're gonna try to make this work anyway. Hopefully I don't snap my first thread. I can still use this, and I'm just, how many? I'm about a foot off. Let's try to make it work. All right. Oops, let's move the camera down and up. Now, ignoring the fact that I am short, one end, hopefully that doesn't come to bite me in a little bit. Why you have the long tails is you're gonna take, let's see, I'm gonna do the top one that I wasn't short on. Whoopsie. So I knock the camera. Make sure these threads aren't tangled, that they tangle easily. All right, so take one of the threads and you can pull, very gently pull on it, and it gathers it up. So, and then you can move your gathering along. All right, let me show you again. Pull, see how it yanks that? And then we can push the gathering along. We're basically doing this all the way around. We don't have to mess with it too much because step 14 has us fit this to the skirt. But I'm going to shear it a little bit. I'm going to gather it a little bit so that it's a little bit easier. Oops. To fit onto the skirt. All right, let's hope this doesn't bite me, since I didn't do the bottom stitching that well. Boop, boop, boop. Pull and move. Pull and move. Gentle as possible. This will take some time, so you're gonna want to be patient with yourself. I don't know if I'm gonna show you me doing this the whole time. We'll see how I feel in a few minutes. So this is going to take me quite a while. This is huge. And we want it sheared all the way around. And you also want it gathered, you know, evenly. Sorry, I keep using the word shearing and gathering. They mean the same thing. So I'm going to keep going. And I will turn the camera back on when I am ready for step 14. This step is annoying, but just be patient with yourself. If you break both your threads, just start again. You don't even have to remove this thread, just do another stitch line, but it's gonna be really tricky because it's already partly gathered. All right, I'm gonna show you a little bit more, and then I'll turn the camera off so you don't have to hear me mumbling and talking to myself and fiddling. I just want you to get a visual idea of what I'm doing. Gently moving the gathering kind of to the halfway point, and then I'll go to the other side and do the same. Show you one more time. Pull. Get a little bit more pull, thank you. And then move these gathers along gently, gently. All right, so I'm gonna keep doing this, and when I'm ready for the next step, I will turn the camera back on. All right, I have my skirt. I gathered the ruffle a little bit. I'll probably still have to fiddle with this a little bit to make sure it attaches to the skirt evenly. But I think it's easier to gather it a little bit before pinning it. And now let's go to step 14. On outside, pin ruffle to lower edge of skirt, placing one seam at center back and remaining seams at large dots on back gathering line along machine basting. Pull up gathering stitches to fit. Stitch along gathering line of ruffle. All right, so what does this mean? First, we gotta pin this ruffle to the skirt. And we have a couple match lines. I already matched it, but I'll take this off to show you. We have the markings we made in the beginning, and there's two markings, one here and one right here. And we're gonna take our seams, where'd it go? They're very hard to see for some reason. Here we go. We're going to take the seam on the ruffle and match it to that dot. So pick one seam that's on this ruffle and match it to each dot. I'm going to pin it at the gathering line. So the gathering line is about 1 inch. So that top gathering line, I believe, is 1 inch. So this top gathering line that I did, because see there's two, the top one, I'm going to match here with the blue dot, but also matching it, the orange top line that I did, to the stitch line on the skirt. All right, so I'll repeat that as I find my seam. Here it is. the top gathering line that I did at 1 inch, or about 1 inch, the seam to the blue dot, and that top gathering line matching the stitch line on our skirt. And I am marking it with 2 pins because we're going to be messing with the skirt a lot still with the shearing and the gatheringness of it all. But I don't want this spot to move. I want that seam to be connected to that marking. And we did the same on this side. There's a blue circle that we marked earlier, just like on that side. And, oops, this seam, the center back seam, we want to match the last seam to the center back seam. All right, and we don't want that to move. It already moved on me once, so maybe I'll make an X with my pins so it doesn't move around as much. All right. Now we have to pin the rest to the skirt. And it's gonna be a little fussy, just like before with the gathering, because we didn't measure. There's no need to. But we might have to pull our threads along more to make sure everything fits. All right. So I'm just gonna pull this, just play with this. I'm seeing if I pinned this like this, if there's, all right. See how if I pinned this, say I did pin, pin, pretend I'm pinning. We have this big gap at the end. I don't have enough shearing at the front. So this is where it gets all fussy. You might have to unpin your markings. We'll see. I have to get more gathering down to the center front, but maybe I'll just take it from here. Gather it more at the ends. All right. Put more gathering here. All right, we're gonna want to even that out, but let's see if we have enough. As I said, it's really fussy. All right, let's see if there's enough. Match our seams again. I mean the markings, where's the marking? Here it is. Oh, it was the center back. Center back to the seam. Put an X. All right, and I'm gonna move a lot of this shearing to the front. As I said, this is very fiddly, fiddly work. Well, that's okay. It'll be worth it in the end. Can you see? All right. Move this, because we're moving more to the front. Move more shearing. Still be gentle, because you don't want to break it. The threads can break easily if you pull too hard, as I've said before. All right. We added more shearing. Let's see if that's enough. All right, find our seam, which is right here. Match it to the dot. Can you see that? It's probably a little tough. There's a blue marking that I did with my erasable pens. All right. That might be the little high, but we'll see. All right, now this looks like it's gonna fit a little more easily. Yeah, it's a little uneven, so I'm just going to spread the shearing around. All right, a little more toward the end. All right, let's try to pin it. Mark that top orange line that I made, orange stitch line, with the stitch line on the skirt, and pin. And keep going. It's a little finicky because of all the shearing. Match it. I know I have one hand inside here and I'm using this like a Muppet. All right. All right, looks like you don't exactly have enough. I'm not gonna take all of it out. I'm going to bring a little more shearing to the front. All right, come in, pull in. Finicky, finicky, finicky. It'll look cute in the end though. Just tell yourself it'll be worth it. Where's that seam that I keep losing? Here it is. I'm just gonna put a pin right here so I stop losing that seam. All right, I'm gonna pull more shearing across that marking. All right, a little bit more. Okay. Now, because we want this pin where that seam is to meet that blue marking. Okay, a little bit more, it looks like. This is gonna be a super floofy ruffle. Gonna put my seam back to my marking. Anymore anyway. All right. Actually might be enough. All right. I don't want, this looks messy. See, if I were to pin right here, there's this weird overlap bit. That doesn't look good. So I'm kind of gonna mess with it a little bit. Take some of these out because I don't like how that looks. See how that looks better than just how it was before? So I'm gonna use my hand to hold that in place, match where I want it placed, matching that orange stitch line to the stitch line underneath, and then pin. I'm gonna put a few more pins right there because I want it to stay when I stitch this. So see how if I were to just pin, how that looks really uneven and messy? I'm kind of gonna place it a little, move the gathers around to a visually pleasing way. At least what I think looks good. All right. You're just gonna have to mess with it all the way around. Let's see, do I like how that is laying? Oh, it looks a little uneven, doesn't it? There we go. That looks better. And that looks better. Yeah, I like that. All right. Once again, I don't know if I'm the best teacher, but hopefully someone out in the world finds watching me do this helpful on their sewing journey. I'm not the best with words, but hopefully the visuals help. Just want to give people out there the confidence to sew their own clothes. I find it a really fun hobby. Maybe someone else out there will get the confidence to do something new and also find it a fun hobby. Once again, this just takes a lot of patience. You might get to the end and be like, oh, I don't like how that looks, and want to repin it. Just put on your favorite podcast or, you know, TV show you've seen a million times so you doesn't need your full concentration. And keep going. If you get frustrated, take a break. Come back to it. This is supposed to be fun, so if you're frustrated, just step away. But this is basically what we're doing all the way to the end, right? I'm gonna mess with it a little bit because I want it more sheared over there. But I'm not gonna torture my phone, camera, or you with this. So that's basically what we're doing all the way around. It's finicky, slightly annoying. I'm gonna take a break before continuing. You should do the same. You wanna keep the fun of sewing. So take breaks when needed, like I'm going to do, and I will see you when this is all pinned, and I will show you how to sew it on. So I have my ruffle pinned to my skirt. I probably went a little overboard with how many pins I put on here, but that's okay. Next, we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and they want us to stitch on our gathering line, which is 1 inch on the top edge of the ruffle. That's on our pattern, if you remember. Let me bring the pattern. It's right here. And then that'll keep our ruffle attached to the skirt. I'm gonna do mine a little differently because I'm gonna be doing step 15 a little differently. I'm gonna show you how to do step 15 correctly, but I'm actually wearing this skirt and step 15 puts another trim, and I don't want another trim on this, but I will show you how to put do the last step and put that braided trim on the skirt. But sticking with step 14, they want you to stitch on that gathering line, because I'm not doing that trim and I don't want a stitch line to be seen, because this orange stitch, so if you were to follow step 15, would get covered along with the stitch that is sewing or attaching your ruffle to the skirt, so you wouldn't see it. Because I'm not going to put that trim to cover it, I'm just going to stitch right below my ruffle trim to try to hide the stitch. But if you're following the pattern exactly, stitch on your gathering line. And if you decide you don't want that extra trim, then you can do what I'm doing, and I'm just gonna stitch right underneath my trim. So let's take this to the sewing machine. All right, I'm at my sewing machine, and I just wanted to remind everybody, to pin this ruffle to this skirt took me an hour and a half, an hour 40 minutes. So, and I've been doing this for a while, so if it took you a really long time to get this ruffle looking even and how you want it, that's okay. Just want to remind everyone that, because it can be really frustrating, because you can be pinning a section and it's just not working out. But even people who've been sewing for a really long time get a little frustrated and have to take a break. You don't need to do it all in one sitting. Anyway, at the sewing machine, remember you are stitching on your gathering line if you're following the pattern as is. I'm going to stitch as close to my ruffle as possible, because I want to hide my seam, because I'm not adding that braided trim. Now I'm going to start at the center back seam of the skirt. It doesn't really matter where you start, but I like to start on a seam. Just a little cleaner. Not that you could tell very much. You'd have to really look. And we're just going to stitch all the way around. Give a back stitch. All right, let's go. Go nice and slow so that, let's see, gotta readjust my chair, sorry. Going really slow to make sure I'm hiding that stitch in the ruffle, moving the pins as I go. Probably gonna sew over some pins. I way over pinned this, but I don't like having it move around on me too much. All right. Also, double check. Keep double checking your bobbin thread. Unpinning this and running out of thread and not knowing would be so annoying, considering how long it took to attach this ruffle to the skirt. So keep remembering to check your bobbin thread if you're worried you're going to run out of thread. All right, oh, so our ruffle is attached, and I will show you. Oh, zoom out a little. Our ruffle's attached. I'm gonna go through this, make sure I got all my pins out, and I'll see you in the last step, step 15. Now we're on the last step, step 15. On outside, center braid over a gathering line on ruffle, turning under ends at one side. Stitch along the center of braid, slip stitch turned ends together. Now, what this means is we are taking our braided trim. Here's the one I have. And we are going to, I put my gathering stitch a little high. It should be a little lower, so pretend it's a little lower. You want to center this trim on top of that gathering stitch and then pin it in place. All right, let me get the ends of mine so you can see. So the reason why I made this stitch orange is I'm gonna actually remove mine because I don't actually want this trim on my skirt. I'm not following the pattern as is, but what you're gonna do if you are using this braided trim is take the braided trim, center it over your gathering stitches, pin it in place, and you're going to just pin that all the way around. And yes, my gathering stitch is too high. If you do the same and your gathering stitch is too high, and you plan on removing your gathering stitch, just pin it lower. Just make sure it is centered, so it's not like too long in some places, right? So you'll just pin it in place all the way around, and you're gonna take this to your sewing machine and just stitch it all the way around. You're gonna stitch it in the center. All right, that is if you are putting your braided trim on, which I am not. At the end, so say you stitched this all the way around, and all right, you're gonna overlap it a little bit when it's pinned. So you're gonna stitch it. So let's pretend this is stitched in place. Let me pin this side. The pins won't actually be in it because you will have stitched it. But I'm not actually going to. I mean, I could take it to my sewing machine and show you where I want you to stitch it, or where they want you to stitch it. All right, pretend this is stitched in place, right? You're going to have an overlap, and you're gonna have to have stitched this, because before, I'm a little all over the place, sorry. When you pin it all the way around, you are gonna, your ends, because they fray, and just because it looks cleaner, you're gonna fold over and pin in place, right? Now you're gonna stitch it all the way around in the middle, and when you're done, you're gonna slip stitch it. Just like we did on the waistband, you're just gonna take a needle and thread and basically stitch these ends together so that they don't flap around and they stay nice and flat. So, if I were doing this, I would pin it all together. Let me turn on my sewing machine. If we were stitching this, all right, can you see my machine? All right. I would take the skirt to my sewing machine once my trim is all pinned on. Note I have no thread in this because I actually don't want this sewn on, but say you did. I would line up my machine And I was trying to stitch in the center of the braided trim. And you just do this all the way around. Remember to back stitch? And just go all the way around, just like all of your other trims. The only difference is the slip stitch. And we did the slip stitch on, let me show you where, the inside back waistband somewhere. Hang on, give me a second to find where we did it. Where did we do? Oh, it was the front. All right, if you look at your front skirt, right, front skirt, on the inside, at the ends, we did the slip stitch here so that the facing would lay flat with the binding, with the elastic casing. So you do that same stitch. So here's the finished skirt. I know this fabric combo isn't for everyone, but that's the great part about making your own clothes. You can choose exactly what you want, even if you can't find it in stores. Let me show you the back really quick. There you go. I hope someone found this video helpful and gave someone the confidence in their sewing abilities. And until next time when we work on the jacket.